Imagine this. A plantation owner, driven by power and greed, forces his obese daughter into the arms of a slave, believing he can control every aspect of her life, even her body. What happens next isn't just disturbing. It's a story of cruelty, power, and tragic humanity that still echoes through history today. But here's the kicker. What the slave did to her body left even the most powerful people on that plantation in shock. How could one act defy centuries of tradition? How could it be so horrifying that it forever changed the lives of all involved? Stick around, because we're about to uncover a dark, hidden part of history that most people are too afraid to talk about. If you're intrigued by stories like this and want to uncover more untold truths, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. The sound of whips cracking and the scent of sugarcane on the wind. This was the world of the plantation. A world where power wasn't just held by money, but by cruelty, control, and an unshakable belief in the divine right of the owner. Imagine this. Rows of slaves working from sunup to sundown under the watchful eyes of overseers, the air heavy with both the heat and the weight of injustice. This was the life that existed for the men and women forced into labor, their very existence measured by the productivity of their hands. For the plantation owner, this world was one of absolute authority. His family too lived in a bubble of privilege, untouched by the harshness that surrounded them. But that power came at a cost. It wasn't just wealth and status that set them apart. It was the belief that their control over the lives of others was inviolable. They dictated not just work, but every detail of their slaves' lives, as if the human body could be owned, molded, and broken by their whims. In the midst of this system was the plantation owner's daughter, a figure torn between the world of luxury and the looming invisible expectations placed upon her. Her body, constantly scrutinized, became the focus of a different kind of oppression, one rooted not in physical labor, but in the rigid constraints of social beauty and acceptable behavior. She wasn't just the daughter of an owner. She was a living example of his success, his pride, and for some, a symbol of his ultimate control. This world of cruelty, class, and unbalanced power is where our story begins. But where does the daughter fit into this nightmare of inherited privilege and forced submission? At the heart of the plantation stood a young woman, the daughter of an owner who was both revered and feared. She was born into luxury, yes, but that luxury came with an unspoken set of expectations, ones that would shape her entire existence. Her father's estate was vast, her clothing always pristine, and her future seemingly secured by the wealth that her family's plantation afforded. But there was a hidden truth that overshadowed it all. The daughter was trapped. Unlike the women in her social circles who floated gracefully through life, her existence was weighed down by the physical and emotional toll of her obesity. It wasn't just her size that caught people's attention. It was the way it made her feel imprisoned in her own skin. She was a symbol of status, yes, but also a constant reminder of her father's control. Her body was her prison, constantly scrutinized by those who watched from the shadows of the grand plantation house. Her father, a man who had built an empire through sheer force, saw his daughter as another piece of property to be paraded, a reflection of his success, yes, but also a symbol of control. The daughter didn't feel like a person at all. She felt like an object to be managed. Every glance, every word, every meal felt like a reminder that she didn't belong to herself. Instead, she was an extension of her father's power. And in his eyes, her weight was a burden she could never escape. The walls of the plantation house were filled with silence, the kind of silence that spoke louder than any shout. And behind the silence, the daughter fought her own battles, wrestling not only with her body, but with the roles forced upon her by her father's expectations. But what if there was a way out? What if someone could challenge the power her father held over her? His name was Samuel. He was just one of many slaves working tirelessly on the plantation, But his story would forever be intertwined with the plantation owner's daughter in ways no one could have predicted. Samuel wasn't a man of great stature in the eyes of the world. He was seen as property, someone toiling under the sun with no hope for a future beyond the field. His entire life had been spent within the confines of the plantation's oppressive system, where his value was measured by how much he could produce, not by the dignity of his humanity. Samuel's life was dictated by the whims of his masters. He worked the land, planted the crops, harvested the cane, everything that kept the estate running smoothly. But beyond the hard labor, there was another layer to his existence, his awareness of the stark divisions that separated him from the other people on the plantation, especially the owner's family. They were the powerful ones, and he was one of the invisible. To them, he was nothing more than an instrument, a tool to be used and discarded at will. Yet Samuel held something that the other slaves did not, a quiet, rebellious spark deep inside him. He had grown tired of simply accepting his place, watching as the family lived in luxury while he and his fellow slaves were treated like animals. He knew that his life would never be his own, but there was one thing he could still control: his body, his will. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Samuel's life was about to change when he was called to the plantation owner's house for a very different reason, a reason that would set off a chain of events that no one could have anticipated. But what could a man like him possibly do in a world where his life held no worth? What followed no one could have predicted. Samuel, a man who had been conditioned to obey, found himself in a situation that was so beyond the ordinary brutality of plantation life that it shook him to his core. The plantation owner's command, an order that seemed so simple to the man in power, was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would disrupt everything. It wasn't what anyone had expected. Not the daughter, not her father, and certainly not Samuel. As he entered the room where the daughter waited, his thoughts were clouded with fear, resentment, and confusion. This was not a man who desired this fate. His body had always been his own, though enslaved by the system. Now even his body seemed to be nothing more than a tool to be wielded. But something within Samuel shifted in that moment. As the situation unfolded, something inside him snapped. He refused to be the passive object of someone else's power anymore. Instead of submitting to the act as instructed, he did something entirely unexpected. He made a choice that shocked everyone, a choice that no one, especially the plantation owner, could have anticipated. Samuel didn't harm the daughter in the way anyone expected. Instead, he turned the situation into something of his own making, something that shook the very foundations of the plantation's order. This was a moment of defiance, a cry for autonomy from someone who had long been told they had none. It was an act of resistance, of reclaiming what little control over his body remained. But what did it mean for the daughter who had been forced into the role she played? What would happen when the plantation owner found out? The shockwaves of that unexpected act reverberated through the plantation like a thunderclap. No one had seen it coming. Not Samuel, not the daughter, and certainly not the plantation owner. The tension in the air was thick with disbelief and anger. The plantation owner, furious beyond measure, felt his grip on everything slip for the first time in his life. He had always believed that he controlled the lives of those around him. But now this act, this moment of defiance, was a powerful reminder that some things can never truly be owned. In the days that followed, whispers spread like wildfire through the plantation. The slaves, who had long been silent witnesses to the brutal power of the owners, began to see something they had never seen before: a crack in the facade. The idea that their lives, their bodies, could never truly be controlled suddenly seemed possible. It was a dangerous thought, one that could ignite rebellions, that could start fires of resistance that would burn long into the future. But for now, those thoughts remained quietly lodged in the back of their minds, for the plantation was still a place of fear. For the daughter, the aftermath was just as complicated. She had always been a passive participant in the cruel game of control her father had played with her life. But now something had changed. She had witnessed an act that defied her father's will, something so powerful that it left her questioning her own place in the world. Was she too nothing more than an object? Or was she more than her father's pawn? Her emotional world was in turmoil. She didn't know whether to feel grateful to Samuel for what he had done, or to resent him for the way it made her confront the uncomfortable truth of her own existence. The plantation owner's wrath, however, was far from over. The fallout from this act was only just beginning. The fallout from that shocking act wasn't just felt by the plantation owner and his daughter. It spread through the entire plantation like a virus, infecting the way people viewed themselves, each other, and the system that had controlled them for so long. The question that hung in the air, one that no one dared to ask aloud, was this: who was in the wrong? Was it the father, who believed his daughter and the slave were his to command? Or was it Samuel, who, despite being enslaved, took control of a situation that he had no right to? This wasn't just a question of morality. It was about power. The plantation owner saw himself as the embodiment of law and order. He was the one who dictated what was right and wrong, who lived above the rules that governed everyone else. But what happens when someone breaks those rules, especially when they have nothing left to lose? Samuel's act was not just an act of resistance. It was a question that the entire plantation, the entire world around them, had ignored for centuries. Can anyone truly own another person, mind and body? Was the daughter's life, her body, really her own, or was it just another piece of her father's property? For the daughter, the moral dilemma was just as complicated. She had been raised to believe she had no power, that her life was something to be controlled. But in the wake of what Samuel had done, she began to wonder, could she find freedom in a world where she had been taught to believe it didn't exist? The question lingered, and it would echo in the minds of all those involved long after the events had unfolded. What is true freedom, and at what cost does it come? The events that transpired on the plantation didn't just alter the lives of those directly involved. They sent shockwaves through the entire social structure of the South. The plantation was a microcosm of a larger system, one that was built on the backs of the enslaved and sustained by an unshakable hierarchy. At the top of this pyramid stood the wealthy landowners, their power unquestioned, their authority absolute. But when Samuel defied the plantation owner, something happened that no one could have predicted. The cracks in the foundation began to widen. The whispers of rebellion spread beyond the boundaries of the plantation. What Samuel had done was more than just a singular act of defiance. It was a symbol, a rallying cry for those who had been silenced for so long. The slaves on nearby plantations began to see the possibility of something more, something different. If Samuel, a man bound by chains, could take control in such a powerful way, then surely they too could fight for their freedom. The moral and social implications of this one event were enormous, but it wasn't just the enslaved who felt the impact. The plantation owners, who had lived in their insulated world of power, began to see that their control was not as secure as they once thought. The act was a direct challenge to everything they stood for, a violation of the order that had kept them in power for generations. The societal structure they had worked so hard to build, where they were untouchable, was now under siege. In the weeks and months that followed, the South became a place of heightened tension. Slave uprisings, protests, and whispered conversations about freedom spread like wildfire. No one could escape the reality that what had been an unchallenged system for centuries was beginning to unravel. As the days passed, the consequences of the act weighed heavily on the plantation owner's daughter. She had spent her life in a gilded cage, shaped by her father's expectations and the oppressive confines of plantation life. She had been a mere object in a world that demanded conformity, a symbol of wealth, status, and control. But now something had shifted within her. The emotional turbulence that had simmered beneath the surface for years began to surface unbidden, challenging everything she thought she knew about herself. She had witnessed Samuel's defiance, his refusal to be owned, and in that moment, something deep within her stirred. It was a sense of freedom, a glimmer of hope that her life could be different, that she didn't have to be defined by the oppressive power her father held over her. Samuel's act had been a stark contrast to the helplessness she had always felt. It was a defiance she had never seen before, but one she realized she longed for. Over time, she began to wrestle with her own identity. The walls that had kept her confined within her father's world slowly started to crumble. She no longer saw herself as a mere extension of her father's wealth and power. For the first time, she saw herself as a person, someone with the ability to make her own choices, to control her own destiny. But how could she reconcile this new sense of self with the world she had been born into? The daughter's redemption wasn't immediate. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. It was a quiet internal revolution that would take years to fully manifest. But the seed had been planted, and in the silence of her room, as she stared out at the plantation's endless fields, she knew something had changed. She would never be the same again. As we look back on this dark chapter of history, there are lessons to be learned, lessons that transcend time and place, echoing in the modern world just as loudly as they did on that plantation. At its core, this story is about power, who holds it, who wields it, and how it can be broken. It's a tale that reminds us of the oppressive systems that have shaped the lives of countless individuals, but also of the small, quiet moments of rebellion that can spark change. One of the most profound lessons from this story is the power of resistance, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Samuel, a man whose life had been reduced to mere property, chose to defy the very system that sought to strip him of his humanity. His act, while unexpected, was an act of profound courage, one that redefined his life and the lives of those around him. It wasn't just an act of rebellion. It was an assertion of his autonomy, a reclaiming of his body and his will in a world that tried to deny both. But the lesson doesn't end there. The daughter, too, learned something crucial from the events that unfolded. Her transformation, while slow and gradual, was a testament to the power of self-awareness and the courage it takes to break free from the chains of societal expectations. She learned that her worth was not tied to her father's power, nor to the role she had been assigned in life. Her redemption lay not in an outward rebellion, but in an inner revolution, in realizing that she could and would shape her own identity. This story is a reminder that no system, no matter how entrenched or powerful, is invincible. Change begins with small acts of defiance, with individuals who dare to challenge the status quo, and with the quiet, persistent will to create something better. The echoes of this story continue to resonate today, urging us to never forget the power of resistance, the importance of self-determination, and the lasting impact of breaking free from the chains that bind us.